Coronavirus cases now well over 2 million worldwide, and more data coming in about the way this honey badger virus attacks many different organs. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Chris Martins, and I'm here with your SARS-CoV-2 daily update, aka the honey badger virus. Why? Because it's very, very difficult to contain. We're going to talk about that today, as well as the damage it does if it gets inside your body. But first, the numbers. So let's go here. It's April 15th today. These are the cases for today. As you can see, we are now over 2 million. United States over 622,000. Still logging well over, in this case, over 1,500, but well over 1,000 is what I was going to say, deaths on a daily basis. Again, still not that many people in critical condition compared to the deaths that are showing up. Not totally clear on that in what's going on there. But still, when you look at the ratio between total recovered and total deaths, you get some very, very unfavorable numbers. Clearly, it's hoped that most of these resolve without any deaths or long-lasting damage that could come from that. Spain now in the number 2 spot's been there for a little while, and Italy still struggling, but way over the curve of what they had at their peak. And they got there, of course, by getting into a very, very strong shutdown and a lockdown, and that's caused a lot of economic damage, of course, social consequences to that. That's the trade-off. That's the balance. On the one hand, if you want to control the spread of this disease and you don't want your hospital system to get overwhelmed, you have to go into the non-pharmaceutical interventions, the NPIs, which means asking people to stay home and severely limiting contact. And of course, that means a lot of things that we took to be normal before this honey badger virus came along. We just can't do them anymore. Sporting events, pubs, gatherings. The social isolation from this is really quite profound. And as we look through here, Russia's still pouring on a lot of cases coming up the bottom of the charts pretty fast there. China, I don't know what to tell you about them. Interestingly, well, I'll show you the data a little bit later, but Singapore is climbing back up in terms of case counts with over 400 yesterday or today, depending on how you look at it. All right, so I don't know what else to tell you about these particular numbers. Yesterday, I put up an incorrect table, so I'm correcting that here today. So this is now ordered by cases per 1 million population. I've even included the headers here so we can make sure that I got it right. Did I get it right? Yes. Total cases per 1 million population, top down. Who's in the lead? Spain. Then Switzerland. Then Italy. Look at Europe showing up here. Then Belgium. Then Ireland. France. Then the USA. Portugal. Netherlands. Austria. Germany, rounding out the top 10 there. So, and this is still a tiny, tiny fraction. Total cases of per 1 million of population, 10,000 would be at 1%. So this is at 0.3%, 0.37, and 0.3, 0.26. So these are tiny percentages of the total population. Of course, the idea some would promote is that maybe there's just a lot of cases that haven't been identified. So to get over here on the total case count, for the most part, you have to have been tested positive by a polymerase chain reaction test, a PCR test. So that's how you get up over here in the total cases. Some countries are doing presumptive cases over here as well, and that can be a quite good way of going about it. If you see people with bilateral ground glass opacities in their CT scans, plus they've got the cough, I mean, you're pretty sure you can put them over in that category. But for the most part, these are people who are tested. So the idea is, well, maybe, testing's really fallen short. Guaranteed, there are many more cases than we know about because of lack of testing. And that is really because of the don't test, don't tell policies that many of these countries at the top of the leaderboard here had implemented that allowed the disease to catch a big hold and take off in their country. All right, so there are two strains of thoughts out there. One is, maybe this thing isn't that bad. This was just posted at my site at Peak Prosperity. This is a comment under one of the main articles today. It was just posted here. It says, "Hello, I greatly appreciate the fine work Chris et al. Have done in keeping us well informed on this topic. I have healthy respect for the power of this virus and have been hunkered down for over a month now. But I'm having trouble reconciling Chris's very scary overviews of just how dangerous and deadly COVID-19 is with the fact that the overwhelming majority of people who contract the disease suffer either mild symptoms or none at all. Couple that with the reports of 10 hospitals being dismantled and predicted hotspots not materializing. I'm generally confused. Can anyone help me out here? A couple of things here, Thomas. First is that the predictions of needing these 10 hospitals and all of that, those are predictions that were based off of models that said, here's what we see coming if we don't do anything. And we don't have any non-pharmaceutical interventions. People don't wear face masks. There's no social distancing. There are no stay-at-home orders. Then you would have had those complete overwhelms. And so actually the fact that we've managed to flatten the curve is a testament to all of those things being implemented in many cases. And we see very clearly places, countries, states in the United States, provinces in Canada, places that took it a little less seriously are now facing the music from that than places that put in more of those social distancing pieces right up front. Second of all, this idea the majority of people who contract the disease suffer either mild symptoms or none at all. Again, this idea of mild symptoms, we have to make sure we've got the right term here, because mild can mean anything up to pneumonia that doesn't land you in the hospital. It can mean in some conditions, it's just anything short of landing you in the hospital is considered mild. And we don't actually know how many people have none at all. So the asymptomatic it's very confusing reporting here. A lot of reporting saying 50% of people are asymptomatic, but we have to parse that a little bit. Asymptomatic would mean somebody who caught it and didn't have any symptoms throughout the entire time they, quote, air quote here, had the disease. And that's totally fine. A lot of viruses are completely asymptomatic through their entire life cycle, and we're familiar with many of them. We have viruses hitching rides in our bodies all the time, present no symptoms. You're not aware you have them, but hey, they've been there. They've lived out their life cycle, and you got them. But then we have to separate those asymptomatic people from pre-symptomatic, and sometimes those two buckets get lumped together. The pre-symptomatic people are people who would test positive for it, but they don't have any symptoms, but they will get the symptoms. All right. So I'm not sure that what we're seeing, because of the long, slow burn of this disease, because of the giant lag that can happen, that China reported that up to 24 and in one case 27 days passed between exposure and presenting with symptoms. So it's always possible that these so-called asymptomatic test cases that we're seeing coming out of places like Iceland, maybe they're truly asymptomatic or maybe they were just pre-symptomatic. We won't know until we get there. The other strain of thought out there is, you know what, it's kind of bad. Not just the total deaths that we see in the world. This is the count as of April 15th here. But it's also resting on the idea of that we're still in the progression of this disease. And of course, these deaths are going to continue to climb, even if magically right now the disease stops spreading. All the people who currently have it, which by the way, as a reminder, it's over 1.4 million active cases. Many of these are going to progress eventually over to serious critical, and some of those are going to progress over time into deaths. So until all of this is done, like even if we stopped every new infection starting tonight, we would have to let all of this play out, and then we would get a final sense of what the true case fatality rate is, just how bad this thing actually is. So alert reader Chuck, and I'm not using Chuck's last name because I didn't get permission first, but hat tip to Chuck for this, built this table, sent it along, and it's an observation on climbing case fatality rate numbers. This is just for the United States, taking the stats on a day-by-day basis from March 19th all the way through to April 14th, which was yesterday. You can see here the confirmed cases. They're climbing through this whole thing. And the number of deaths, of course, are climbing through this whole progression down the rows. But here's an interesting note. The deaths divided by cases. So the case fatality rate, which is total confirmed cases divided into total deaths at that point in time. They went down for a little while from 1.5 to 1.34 to 1.30, 1.30 to 1.26. And then there on March 23rd, they hit a low and they started climbing again from 1.4, 1.5, back down to 1.44, 1.5, 1.8, 1.74, 0.9, 2, 2.3, 2.48, on and on and on and on until you get here to 4.24%. And that's just looking at deaths divided by total cases. So as the U.S. ramped up its testing, this is right about when testing really came forward, I would have thought the opposite of this. I would have expected that the case fatality rate would have actually continued to go down, not up, using this particular measure, which is confirmed cases divided into total number of deaths, which is one way to do it. Another way to do it would be to take total number of resolved cases, which is people who have recovered, plus the people who have died as the total number of resolved cases, because you resolve by either recovering or dying, and then dividing that into deaths. And that would give you a very different number, which is much scarier, much higher numbers, which sometimes are as high as 40%, 50%, depending on the country, and where they are in the flight of that whole thing. So this is an interesting observation. So I started thinking on that, like, what would account for that? And is this just a U.S. specific thing? Is this something to do with testing? So I wandered over to the Worldometer's site and looked at their outcome of total cases. This is a different measure. This is one of the other ones I just mentioned. Total closed cases. So that's the recovery rate versus the death rate. So in the green, this is the recovery rate. And so these two numbers together would add up to 100% at all times. So the recovery rate, this is exactly what I would have expected. Over time across the world, we're watching the recovery rate climb, but then it's starting to bend over and it's getting asymptotically closer to the truth. And over time, this is what we would expect to see. The death rate is going to fall and it's going to start to shallow bottom out like this. Okay. Notice here that this bottoms out here at March 7th. Here, there was noticing a bottoming out in the United States around March 23rd. So these charts aren't aligned. So the United States is a very large proportion of this overall chart because it's fully, what are we at, a quarter of the total? Little over a quarter of the entire world's cases at this point are in the United States. So the United States is very much influencing this chart. And so then, so this is kind of what I would have expected. And then if we let this run all the way out, eventually this whole thing settles out and all of the cases that are out there that are confirmed right now, they either recover or the people die. They resolve in one of those two ways. And we would see this, expect to see this climb slowly. Maybe it gets all the way up very close. And this would sneak all the way down. And then eventually, wherever that settled out, that would be your true case fatality rate. I was expecting that to settle out at around 3.5% or so. The difficulty is what happens when we run this chart forward from March 7th onward, and we see something that I totally was not expecting to find, which is that this death rate has now climbed back up again, and it now seems to be settling right around the 21% mark, last reading of 20.92% on April 14th. So this is a very odd sort of a finding here. I was not expecting this upward curve to this chart. So if anybody has an explanation for that, please get back to me. I've been thinking this through. I don't have a lot of great explanations for that. One is maybe we're only testing serious cases now, so we're missing a lot of cases. And so, there aren't as many people to quote unquote recover because we're actually testing only for people who are really serious, like they come to the hospital and they're already like can't breathe. We test them. Maybe that would explain that. So we actually have an unnaturally low denominator in this case because we're not including a lot of people who have authentically recovered who just weren't caught anywhere in the system yet. Then maybe it's bad case classification. We're seeing some talk of this where in some places they're starting to include, it's that whole thing we talked about yesterday. Are you dying with coronavirus or you're dying of coronavirus? So, if somebody gets in a car accident and they test positive for COVID, some places might lump them in and say, they died of COVID, right? And so maybe it's a case of too many people are being thrown into this bucket. Maybe that's what this represents. So it's too high of a numerator. Maybe I don't know. So I don't really think it's that. I don't have a good answer for that. This is again, maybe this is a statistical thing or it's how we're classifying deaths. I'm not totally clear yet, but I'm just putting it out there because I'd love an answer for it. Anyway, these are the kinds of curiosities that come up when you're doing this kind of daily research and updating. And so I'm very intrigued with finding this. So bookmarked. We'll come back to this. Anyway, I'm alert for it. We're going to keep looking out for this. All right, the damage might be a little bit more widespread than we thought. This was an article that just came out today in the Washington Post, which, by the way, is starting to get really good reporting. As much as I was beating on the media, and rightfully so, through January and through most of February for just being really out to lunch, missing this whole pandemic while it was just obviously raging. They're catching up now, and I'm seeing some very good reporting. This is an example of that. So this is the pathology findings from the autopsies I presented yesterday. Very interesting stuff. And it was just 4 patients out of Louisiana, and we're comparing those to 2 other cases out of China. Way too few to really know what's going on. And by the way, as good as those autopsies were, they didn't go far enough. I wanted to see more histology slides. I wanted to see a very, very much more thorough examination of all the other organs out there. But this is clinical data that's coming out now, and I want to go through it. Coronavirus destroys lungs, we know that. But doctors are finding its damage in kidneys, hearts, elsewhere. The new coronavirus kills by inflaming and clogging the tiny air sacs in the lung, choking off the body's oxygen supply until it shuts down the organs essential for life. That's one of the theories. The other organs are being damaged because of lack of oxygen. That's true, possibly. But clinicians around the world are seeing evidence that suggests the virus also may be causing heart inflammation, acute kidney disease, neurological malfunction, blood clots, which we covered yesterday, intestinal damage, and liver problems. That development has complicated treatment for the most severe cases of COVID-19, the illness caused by the virus, and makes the course of recovery less certain, they said. And that's something we've been worried about, this course of recovery. How much of this damage, especially for the severely ill patients, critically ill patients, is permanent or long-lasting, right? Really, really affecting the convalescence and rejoining of life. The prevalence of these effects is too great to attribute them solely to the cytokine storm, a powerful immune system response that attacks the body, causing severe damage, doctors and researchers said. And by the way, if you want to see that cytokine storm, I presented that. That's the title of one of the daily updates I did, month and a half, 2 months ago. Cytokine storm is a really important thing to understand. So if you haven't seen that, maybe go check that one out. Almost half the people hospitalized because of COVID-19 have blood or protein in their urine, indicating early damage to their kidneys, said Alan Klieger, a Yale University School of Medicine nephrologist who co-chairs a task force assisting dialysis patients who have COVID-19. Almost half have some form of damage to their kidneys. Continuing on in the same article, here's the same link, all of that. Even more alarming, he added, is early data that shows that 14 to 30% of intensive care patients in New York and Wuhan, China, have lost kidney function and require dialysis or its in-hospital cousin, continuous renal replacement therapy. 14 to 30%. This is a big, fat clinical finding. So both New York and Wuhan were reporting this. New York intensive care units are treating so much kidney failure, he said, they need more personnel who can perform dialysis and have issued an urgent call for volunteers from other parts of the country. They're also running dangerously short of sterile fluids used to deliver that therapy. He said, that's a huge number of people who have this problem, and that's new to me. He said, I think it's very possible that the virus attaches to kidney cells and attacks them. So let's review here real quick. Kidneys, hearts, elsewhere. Let's look here real quick. Remember, I showed this yesterday, the ACE2 tissue distribution. I've highlighted here, intestine, kidney, liver, lung. We see that, yes, there's lots of ACE2 distribution in these places. So the fact that the kidneys are getting attacked and attached is not surprising. The lung, of course. But here are lots of other places we might expect trouble to show up. Liver, of course. Yep. And the intestines, quite a bit of ACE2 there. All right, with that in mind, let's look at this too, continuing with the same article. Anosmia, the medical term for the inability to smell, was not initially recognized as a symptom of COVID-19. Hopkins said doctors were so overwhelmed by patients with severe respiratory problems, she said, that they didn't ask the question. And we reported on this, a couple of weeks ago, I think. I can't remember now. But subsequent data from a symptom tracking app has shown that 60% of people later diagnosed with COVID-19 reported losing their senses of smell and taste. 60%. So if you lose your sense of smell or taste, that's a really strong indicator. I can't think of many other reasons that would happen besides chemical damage. But taste is a hard thing to lose. Smell is easier because you can easily overwhelm your olfactory bulbs up in your nose. But taste is, tricky to lose in conjunction like that. Absent COVID-19, I think. About a quarter of participants experienced anosmia before developing other symptoms, suggesting it can be an early warning sign of infection. Intriguingly, Hopkins said people who lose their sense of smell don't seem to develop the same severe respiratory problems that made COVID-19 so deadly. Now, that is interesting and pretty encouraging if you have lost your sense of smell or something like that. So it seems like you're on a better track, possibly. But a very small number of patients have experienced confusion, low blood oxygen levels, and even lost consciousness, a sign that the virus may have traveled along their olfactory nerve ending straight to the central nervous system. So, honey badger of a virus indeed. This idea that it's attacking nerve tissue is pretty strongly supported by the anosmia here, but the idea that it could travel into the brain, a little bit of conjecture. I'd like to see the data on that. But again, that will complicate things if it turns out it can hang out in nerve tissue, because a lot of viruses that hang out in nerve tissue park there and just sort of stay there for years, sometimes decades, as in the case of shingles and chickenpox, all that. Continuing on, there are also reports that COVID-19 can turn people's eyes red, causing pink eye or conjunctivitis in some patients. In one study of 38 hospitalized patients in Hubei province, China, found a third had pink eye. But like many of the non-respiratory effects of this virus, the symptom may be relatively uncommon. 30% isn't that uncommon, and may develop only in people who are already severely ill. The fact that the virus has been found in the mucous membrane that covers the eye in a small number of patients, however, does suggest that the eye could be an entryway for the virus. Of course, we've known that for a long time, and it's one reason that face shields and goggles are being used to protect healthcare workers. We reported on that. That might have even been all the way back in January, but it was certainly in early February, this whole idea that it comes in through the eyes. So, yeah, we know that. The virus is also having a clear impact on the gastrointestinal tract, causing diarrhea, vomiting, and other symptoms. One study found that half of COVID-19 patients have gastrointestinal symptoms, and specialists have coined a Twitter hashtag, #NotJustCough, to raise awareness of them. Gastrointestinal, half. So a third with pink eye, half with GI problems. You've got maybe up to 60% people diagnosed, reported losing their sense of smell along the way. You've got all this kidney failure as well. Again, no big surprise here. With the stomach, intestine, this is all the places we find ACE2, which is one of two receptors that this thing can come in through. As well, we've also heard about, there's a lot of tissue. This isn't all the tissues. This is just the ones that were studied in this study. There are other tissues, particularly in the males, in the testes. There's very strong amount of ACE2 expression down there as well. And so there's a variety of other places this could show up, including these. So, at any rate, studies suggest that patients with digestive systems will also develop a cough, but one may occur days before the other. Here's the punchline in this, I think. The question is it kind of behaving like a hybrid of different viruses? Spiegel asked. What we're learning is, it seems anyway, that this virus homes in on more than one organ system, and that's a little unusual. So, yes, this is a real beast of a virus, and it's behaving in lots of different ways, attacking lots of different places all at once. So when we get back to this, maybe it's not that bad, and, well, we could sort of look at total deaths. To me, the fact that it's got, all this widespread damage and attacks all kinds of things tells me I don't want it, ever. Good news is coming out, though. This is a treatment about ivermectin. Thank you to all the people who sent this my way. I wanted to see the actual study when it came out. It took me a couple days to sort of find it. Here we are. So ivermectin. This is an antiparasitic drug, and pretty common. Anyway, this is interesting. An observational registry-based study from 169 hospitals across Asia, Europe, Africa, North and South America, registry-based study. I'm going to have to look up what that means. I forgot to look that up. This isn't like they did a study, but looks like they combined data from multiple places. 169 hospitals. We evaluated critically ill hospitalized patients diagnosed with COVID-19 with lung injury requiring mechanical ventilation between January 1st and March 1st. In this series of 1,970 patients, 1,609 survived hospitalization to discharge, and 361 died. So that's 18% of people who were hospitalized ended up dying. We recorded 52 patients who received ivermectin once after mechanical ventilation was instituted. So I think they just looked through, they found here 7 here, 21 here, 3 here, 14 there, 7 there. I think these are just people who received it maybe for other reasons, or they were already taking it and it was just part of their regular drug dose that was still given to them because they'd already been taking it. I'm not clear on that. I'd have to read the study further. I didn't realize, I'm getting a little confused how it was set up, so I'd have to dig further. The indications for use of the drug were related to clinician preference and based on prior data on the broad antimicrobial and specifically antiviral effects of this agent. Okay, clinician preference. Maybe this was clinicians trying it, but weird that it was tried so spottily in 5 different continents, countries, areas. Anyway, compared to 1,918 conventionally treated patients, we observed a survival benefit for ivermectin. The mortality rate was 18.6% for untreated versus 7.7% with ivermectin. That is a huge, huge difference. P value of less than 0.001, so less than a 1 in 1,000 chance of this being accidental random chance. The hospital length of stay was 15.7 plus or minus 8 days for untreated versus 10.9 plus or minus 6 days. Wow, huge reduction in length of stay. Again, p-value, very highly significant. And intensive care unit length stay of 8.2 plus or minus 6.2 days versus 6 plus or minus 3.9 days. And again, very highly significant findings. So that's really encouraging data out of ivermectin right there. This ivermectin is a drug that operates in a way that it prevents, it blocks a protein, importin, that sits at the outer nuclear envelope inside the cell. That and that importin, its job is it imports stuff. So it's what's called importin. It imports proteins into the nucleus, and some of those viral proteins get into the nucleus, do all kinds of damage and really block and inhibit the antiviral activity of the host cell. So by blocking the import of those viral proteins into the nucleus, that seems to confer really good clinical outcomes here. So that's what this is saying. So that's pretty promising. If these can be repeated, and I have no reason why we shouldn't have a big set of studies ongoing right now, because those are very, very good, like dropping the mortality by more than half and reducing the length of the hospital stay and reducing the time in the intensive care unit. All good stuff. All right. In the spirit of answering the question, is this bad or not so bad? One way to look at this is to look at the total deaths. And this is so a couple things going on here. First, because we're all in lockdown, we're actually all in safer position. There's far fewer cars on the road, so deaths by auto accidents are way down at this point in time. And because of all the lack of air pollution, and particularly in places that are heavily polluted like northern Italy or in places like Wuhan, other places that were formerly super polluted, the lack of air pollution actually can have a really strong, powerful impact on people not dying. So it's interesting to note here that total weekly deaths in the United Kingdom from all causes, right? We're seeing here that this is the range, mortality range in previous years. I believe this is a 5-year max and min range. So this would be the most people that ever died in that year, and this would be the fewest, that max to min range. And then here's 2020, and then here's what we're seeing. And so if we said this would sort of be around 10,000 weekly deaths would be the norm here for this time of year, they're actually seeing a little over 16,000. So we'll call that approximately 6,000 additional deaths in the UK per week. 6,000. So, I would have to say that in the scheme of things, out of these two strains of thought, if you told me that there was going to be a random wrecking ball that was going to come through the country and squash 6,000 people, I would per week, I would say, that's pretty bad. Let's see if we can stop that. So that's what we're seeing in the UK, in New York, seeing the same kind of thing here. Again, all deaths. This is the spike here from 9/11 in 2001 in New York City. And then this is deaths in New York City by month. This is just city, not New York. So let me, NYC. Let me just make sure I get that in there so that gets recorded properly. All right. And here we're seeing that this would sort of be the normal. There's a cadence to the year. You know, we can talk about why that is some other time, but this is, we would have expected about maybe 4,500 deaths at this time of year. And instead, New York City is experiencing a total of 9,780 deaths in the month leading up to ending at April 4th. So, yeah, these are monthly deaths. So at any rate, that's a huge increase. And again, this is a balance of two things. This is fewer deaths from lots of other causes, more deaths from COVID-19. So this is at a minimum saying that COVID-19 is responsible for that many additional deaths above baseline. But honestly, it's also responsible for saving some people from dying in car accidents and falling off of subway platforms and all the other tragic ways that people tend to die. All right. Relaxing the stay-at-home edict. Here's the China edition. You know, China's way out in front of the United States for all of this stuff in terms of timing. So, been following Jennifer Zheng for a while. This came out on April 14th, noted that there are now urgent lockdown notices and new photos from Hubei province in China. We're seeing the dirt piles again. We're seeing trucks parked across openings. There are all these different edicts that are coming out that says urgent notice. All county, town, and village departments, all government departments in all towns and villages must continue to implement the level 1 response measures, resume all previous disease prevent and control measures, and make sure nothing goes wrong when leaders. So there's they started to relax things and they immediately clamped them back down again. So relaxing this whole stay-at-home piece looks like it's going to be harder than we thought, because as soon as you take your foot off the brakes, guess what? The virus comes roaring back out again. So that's what we're seeing in the Hubei province. And this is even the gold standard here is relaxing stay-at-home. This is the Singapore edition. As of the 15th of April, 12 p.m., we have confirmed and verified an additional 447 cases of COVID-19 infection in Singapore. So yeah, this is what happens when you, this is a live action video here of the coronavirus when, you just relax your NPIs just a little bit and you, see what, if you can just get back to work. Yeah, no, that didn't work out so good. There it is. That's how it escapes right there. Of these, 0 are imported. 0 imported. 38 are local cases in the community. 5 are work permit holders residing outside dormitories. I love this data. I'm so jealous of this kind of data. And 409 are work permit holders residing in dormitories. So, the honey badger virus got into the dormitories, and that's where most of this is coming from. Again, showing this is a highly transmissive disease that really gets out pretty quickly if it needs to. Let's turn to the economy really quickly. And again, I'm very sympathetic to the idea that we have to stop the pandemic on the one hand. We got to get that R0 below 1 using NPIs, these tight containment and isolation actions. You got to be careful because if you relax these a little bit, the badger virus gets out and escapes. You got to keep the economy going though, right? Or the outcome could be as bad or worse than actually what results from the pandemic. And against all of this, you need to keep the infection levels below that which swamps the hospitals. So these three things have to be kept in some sort of a balance, and that's the struggle, and that's the balancing act. This concerns me here in Singapore because, this is close to best in case as you can get in terms of how to manage this thing. And they're finding that even with just a slight relaxation, this thing comes roaring back out again. All right, remember I told you about oil. So the International Energy Agency comes out with a forecast for 2020, and they're forecasting a record demand contraction. And by record, I mean a record demand contraction. This was bad. This is the double dip recessions of the early 80s. This is how much oil demand went back during the Great Financial Recession. What the heck is this? I'll tell you what this is. This is an enormous amount of economic activity that is not happening. And so that little red bar right there tells me everything I need to know about how bad the economy is going to get. And no, the Federal Reserve bailing out hedge funds and throwing money at junk bonds and bailing out, the specialized premier high risk, high reward kind of products like junk bond funds and stuff like that of their best buddies and friends. Yeah, bailing all that out is not going to matter. This is the signaling the demand destruction that's actually happening from the bottom up. In the United States, we just received the worst reading ever in Empire State Manufacturing. This is a survey that comes out of the New York Fed looking at manufacturing, minus 78.2. Oh my God, that's just horrifying. I mean, look at that in relation to the worst reading ever here, about minus, what was that, maybe minus 35-ish there at the depths of the great financial recession. Far worse, but it's not, again, just the destination. It's not how the reading itself. It's the pace of it all. It's not the skydiving that gets you. It's the parachute not opening and that sudden stop at the end. So at the pace of this change, the abrupt nature of this shutdown, again, speaks to the level of damage that's happening. As well, the worst manufacturing decline in the United States since 1946. Why did manufacturing shut down so hard? That, well, I guess the war effort was winding down. That was a huge manufacturing effort. So manufacturing in steep contraction in the United States. I'm also here seeing that the banks in the United States, not even close to reserved up. So loan loss reserves to total loans, this is on a percentage basis. So if the total loans here in, say, by 2010, when the banks were really trying very, very hard to get their loan loss reserves in balance with the total amount of loans that were actually going bad, that hit a peak of just over 6% here for one of the largest banks. But across all these banks, say it must have been around averaging, I don't know, somewhere around 4% or so. What's interesting is look how far behind the curve all of these banks are right now. Yes, they just increased their loan loss reserves pretty strongly in yesterday's earnings reports, but they're still maybe halfway to where they need to be, maybe a third of the way to where they need to be. So many more losses. And by the way, I'm not even suggesting that 6% should be the peak. If you look at this number, wow. If you look at this number, holy moly, I'm going to suggest that they ought to have numbers that are closer to 10 or 12%. So banks, not even close to reserved up. You know what that means? Federal Reserve is going to come out and bail these out again. Because why? Because they're going to lose money otherwise. So that's what they feel they have to do. All right, remember in this balancing act, if you got to keep the economy going, that falls into the, well, maybe it's not that bad. Can we just get the economy going again? You got to keep the hospitals working, though. It's like, oh, no, it is kind of bad. Very sensitive to this balancing act. I don't mean to suggest that we should be entirely over here just trying to minimize deaths. This is a virus we have to live with. It's pretty bad. I think it causes worse effects than we even understand. I think once we get our arms in a couple of months around what the actual lasting damage is, we're going to find that, again, we're going to want to very, very much spend time over here as well. I keep mentioning this thing around food. I want you to think about your food security. One of the things that Adam Taggart and I work on and have been working on for 12 years is this idea of resilience. And our book, Prosper, has it's all dedicated to resilience. And we talk about building resilience across 8 forms of capital. Financial capital, very important. Of course, we spend a lot of time there. But as well, your living capital, and that could include both your body and its health, as well as the ecosystems around you, as well as your garden outside. Having access to abundant soils, clean water, and good food and all of that is all part of your personal resilience. And so a lot of things in here. If you haven't read that, I would strongly recommend reading this book. Very logically lays out the case for how you could build up your resilience across 8 forms of capital. And we've gotten a lot of great reviews and feedback from people who say it really helped them. We're seeing now meat edition here, supply chain disruptions, but it goes farther than meat, I should say. I guess maybe that's it's food supply chain disruptions, beginning with meat. Here, this is at Wayne Farms, chicken processing plant in Alabama. Workers recently had to pay the company 10 cents a day to buy masks to present themselves from the new coronavirus, according to a meat inspector. Who makes their workers pay 10 cents a day? That is cheap beyond cheap. Come on, Alabama. That's awful. Wayne Farms. That is awful. 10 cents a day. You got to buy your own masks. That is terrible. Full stop. Shameful sort of action right there. All right. Hope you feel bad about that. In Colorado, nearly a third of the workers at a JBS USA beef plant stayed home amid safety concerns for the last 2 weeks as a 30-year employee of the facility died following complications from the virus. Why? Because they work elbow to elbow in these meat plants, and the conditions are just right. The temperature is cool and the humidity is right. I bet this stuff spreads easy in here. Since an Olymel pork plant in Quebec shut down on March 29th, the number of workers who tested positive for the coronavirus quintupled to more than 50, according to their union. The facility and at least 10 others in North America have temporarily closed or reduced production in the last 2 weeks because of the pandemic, disrupting food supply chains that have struggled to keep pace with surging demand at grocery stores. Smithfield Foods, the world's biggest pork processor, on Sunday said it's shutting a pork plant indefinitely and warned that plant shutdowns are pushing the United States perilously close to the edge in meat supplies for grocers. Lockdowns that aim to stop the spread of the coronavirus have prevented farmers across the globe from delivering produce to consumers. Produce, there's your garden, people. Millions of laborers also cannot get to the fields for harvesting and planting. There's your garden, people. And there are too few truckers to keep the goods moving. So it's just the supply chain. There's plenty of food, but it's over there. It can't come through the processing plant, so it can't get to the store. If it can't get to the store, it can't get to you, right? So lots of breakdowns in the supply chains. As well, I advised a number of people at Peak Prosperity in the subscriber side. I said, hey, you might want to get chickens too, because chicken's a great source of eggs. They will recycle all of your kitchen waste and turn it into high quality compost and eggs. You just can't beat the chicken for what it does. But if you want to buy chicks, look at this. This is one of the places that Evie and I have gone, my partner and I have gone to buy chicks. Look at this. If you want these Orpingtons, they can start delivering in August 24th. No. Can't, as late as October 26th. Can't get any. How about these blue copper Morans? Nothing till October 26th. Yikes. Blue cuckoo Morans? Possibly there might be a few available out here in August, but that's it. And so on and on and on. So there's very few green bars out here, just nothing for most of this. And the earliest I can see any showing up is July. That's it, July 20th. That would be your first. And that's if you jumped in and wanted blue splash Morans and you were willing to wait till July 20th. So very hard to come by these because guess what? A lot of people caught the same vibe. As well, because of these pandemic gardens, we're finding that seed companies having a lot of trouble keeping up as more and more Americans are turning to growing their own food. I'm really glad that people are doing that because we do need these pandemic gardens. Not as worried about the seeds as the chicks. These are going to be, turns out, hard to come by right now. It says here, as millions of Americans hunker down at home, the coronavirus outbreak has led to runs on everything from toilet paper to baker's yeast. Now people are reporting another shortage of seeds to start their pandemic gardens. Some seed companies have said they've temporarily stopped taking new orders after seeing an overwhelming surge in demand. Temporarily stopped. Emphasis on that, temporarily. The increase in orders is just unbelievable, said George Ball, chairman of Burpee Seeds, a 144-year-old seed company in Pennsylvania. The company closed to new orders last week because it needed time to catch up, although it plans to start accepting them again on Wednesday. With Americans largely stuck in place, many are turning to home-based activities that are boosting sales of home improvement goods, alcohol, and gardening supplies. We don't advocate drunk gardening, but if you're going to do something drunk, gardening is a little bit better than operating your home improvement goods. I guess there's going to be a lot of really poorly made shelves out there on the sidewalk in a couple of months. That's what the COVID shelves. That's what we're going to call them. All right, remember, plant your garden. Lots of benefits for doing that. And as well, it's been a while since I've updated this, but the SARS-CoV-2 issues list, remember I used to call this list not the flu, not SARS. I think people have gotten that message. But there's a number of things on here now that we didn't have before, including fact that patients sometimes have virus in their systems long after recovery. That's the data that's coming out of the Daegu region in South Korea. As well, multiple organ damage now, lungs, heart, kidneys, testes, neural, maybe? It might be permanent in some cases. Certainly the loss of function in the lungs looks like it could be permanent if it leads to scarring in there. There's a routine loss of the senses of smell and taste. We got these microthrombi showing up now. And what else do we got? Remember I said this months ago that the treatment is very complicated and complex. So that's what's showing up. And yes, ivermectin may have some benefit. Hydroxychloroquine may have some benefit, but these things are not silver bullets that completely cure this thing. That's just not the case. So conclusions for today. Those autopsy reports were and remain and are incomplete. It's clear that widespread attack on multiple organs and tissue systems by SARS-2 is happening. I want to see more autopsy reports, and they should be far more comprehensive. I want to see tissue samples and lots of slides from all over different organs, so we know what's going on. We can confirm what we're seeing clinically. These above trend deaths in New York City and UK support the idea that, coronavirus is kind of a bad thing. It leads to excess deaths, not just a few, but many thousands per week. And remember, that's against lower deaths from cleaner air, lack of driving accidents, etc., that have been overwhelmed by additional deaths by SARS-2. So net, in places that are getting hit by this, yes, it's leading to a big increase in death. Any relaxation of stay at home, that's likely to be met by another wave of infections, and that's in the gold standard countries, best in class. We're going to have to see what the institutionally compromised and weakened United States can manage when it wants to be done with this whole stay at home thing and get back to work. It has to be done really intelligently with lots of testing, lots of contact tracing. You have to have a clear plan for who's going to stay home, who gets to go to work, all of that stuff. And, you can't do that when you have dummies like the Surgeon General saying masks don't work just a couple of weeks ago, or a month ago now. So anyway, we'll see how that happens in the United States. But anyway, honey badger virus, pretty bad when you let your foot off of the situation. Economic damage, it's really only just begun. Worst readings ever in a variety of measures, including oil consumption. And D.C., it dickers around while the central banks shovel money to family and friends and all that stuff. It's gross. It's really disgusting what's happening here. So hopefully they get their act together, but not hopeful. And please, you'd better be working on securing your access to food. Don't run your deep pantry down. Keep it restocked. Plant that garden. Okay? Please do those things. That's my strongest wish for you at this point in time. And remember, you're going to have to resubscribe because people keep saying almost every day that they are getting helpfully unsubscribed from both this channel, from Twitter, which is at Chris Martenson over at Twitter if you want to follow me there. There it is, at Chris Martenson. So people are, for whatever reason, Twitter and YouTube have decided I'm some sort of threat to the something. Big corporations because I beat on them. I'm not deferential enough to the central bankers. I don't know what the story is, but they feel, hopefully, it's their job to unsubscribe people from my channels. And so they continue to do that. And shame on them for that. And of course, we're observing all of this and have long memories for these sorts of things. All right. That's that. Hey, you know what? I'm going to take tomorrow off from this particular series because I have a lot of extra writing to do and other content I have to produce over at peakprosperity.com. So I will see you the day after tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll get back to you then. Be safe, everyone. Bye-bye.
Hi, folks. Adam Taggart here. Chris Martenson and I are the co-founders of Peak Prosperity. If you want to get alerted whenever we release a new video from Chris, just click the red subscribe button right beneath the YouTube video player. Once you've done that, a little bell icon will appear right next to it. Click on that bell. It looks like this. And that's it. The next time we publish a video from Chris, you'll immediately receive a notification from YouTube. Thanks for watching our videos.